first story that was ever really told before it was collected into the Gospels was what we call today the Passion Narrative. It is that part of the story of Jesus from Maundy, Thursday, and sometimes including Palm Sunday, but mostly Maundy, Thursday through the crucifixion. That was the story that circulated throughout the Christian community during the early centuries. And each gospel writer told it a slightly bit different, but for the most part, it is probably the most similar text in all four of the Gospels. We're going to share that with you today in a kind of unique way. Thanks to the technology that we have available, I'll be narrating it today, and then we'll have various other folks popping in to read the other parts. During this time of this coronavirus situation, we're limited to how many folks there are. Let me assure you that all of us have gathered individually to do this so that everyone was safe in the filming. I guess you might say, no human beings were put at risk in the filming of this particular Passion Narrative reading. It is from the Gospel of St. Matthew, and let me share the narration part. Then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and said, "What will you give me if I deliver him to you?" And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. And from that moment, he sought an opportunity to betray him. Now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Where will you have us prepare for you to eat the Passover?" He said,
"Go into the city to a certain one and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'"
And the disciples did as Jesus directed them, and they prepared the Passover. When it was evening, he sat at table with the 12 disciples, and they were eating. And Jesus said,
"Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me."
And they were very sorrowful, and began to say to him one after the other,
"Is it I, Lord? Is it I?"
"Is it I, Lord? Is it I, Lord?"
And he answered,
"He who has dipped his hand in a dish with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born."
And Judas, who betrayed him, said, "Is it I, Master?" And he said to him,
"You have said so."
Now as they were eating, Jesus took bread, blessed it and broke it, and gave it to his disciples. And he said,
"Take, eat, this is my body."
and then he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying,
"Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I shall not drink again of this fruit of the vine till that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom."
And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And then Jesus said to them,
"You will all fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee."
Peter declared to him,
"Though they all fall away from you, I will never fall away."
Jesus said to him,
"Truly I say to you, this very night before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times.
and Peter said to Jesus,
"Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you."
and so said all the disciples. And then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples,
Sit here while I go yonder and pray."
and taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And then he said to them,
"My soul is very sorrowful, even in death. Remain here and watch with me."
Going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed.
"My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nonetheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt."
And he came to the disciples, and he found them sleeping. And he said to Peter,
"So could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak."
Again for a second time, he went away and prayed.
"My Father, if this cannot pass until I drink it, thy will be done."
And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. And so leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words. And then he came to the disciples and he said to them,
Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand.
Now while he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs, from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given him a sign, saying, The one that I shall kiss is the man. Seize him. And he came up to Jesus at once and said, Hail, Master! And he kissed him. And Jesus said to him,
Friend, why are you here?
Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who was with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. And then Jesus said to him,
Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled, that it must be so?
At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds,
Have you come out against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But all this has taken place, that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled.
Then all of the disciples forsook him and fled. Then those who had seized Jesus led him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. But Peter followed him at a distance, and as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And then going inside, he sat with the guards to see the end. Now the chief priests and the whole council sought testimony against Jesus, that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last two came forward and said,
This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God, and to build it in 3 days.
And the high priest stood up and said,
Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men have testified against you?
But Jesus was silent. And the high priest said to him,
I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God.
And Jesus said to him,
You have said so, but I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming to the clouds of heaven.
And then the high priest tore his robes. And he said,
He has uttered blasphemy. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment?
They answered,
He
deserves
deserves death.
And then they spat in his face and struck him. And some slapped him, saying, Prophesy to us,
in Christ.
Who is it that struck you? Now Peter was sitting outside the courtyard. And a maid came up to him and said,
You also were with the Galilean.
But he denied it before all of them, saying,
I do not know what you mean.
And when he went out to the porch, another maid saw him, and she said to the bystanders,
This man was with Jesus of Nazareth.
and again he denied it with an oath.
I do not know those men.
After a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, Certainly you are one of them, for your accent betrays you. And then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear.
I do not know those men.
And immediately the cock crowed. And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him up and led him away and delivered him to Pilate the governor. When Judas, his betrayer, saw that he was condemned, he repented and brought back 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and to the elders, saying, I've sinned in betraying innocent blood. And they said,
So what is that to us? See to it yourself.
And throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, Judas departed, and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priest, taking the pieces of silver, said,
It is
It
not
is not
lawful to put them into the treasury, since it
seeing
is
they are
blood money.
So they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. And therefore that field, which had been called a field of blood, is still called that even to this day. And then was fulfilled what had been spoken by the prophet Jeremiah when he said, "And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price on him on whom a price had been set by some of the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me." Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him,
"Are you the king of the Jews?"
and Jesus said to him,
You have said so.
but when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he made no answer. And then Pilate said to him,
"Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?"
but he gave no answer, not even to a single charge. And so the governor wondered greatly. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner they wanted. And they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them,
"Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?"
for he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him,
Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much over him today in a dream.
Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the people to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. And the governor said to them again,
"Which of the two do you want me to release for you?"
and again they said,
Barabbas.
And Pilate said to them,
"Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?"
they all said,
Let him be crucified.
And he said,
"Why? What evil has he done?"
but they shouted all the more,
Let him be crucified.
So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and he washed his hands before the crowd, saying,
"I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves."
and then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. And then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium, and they gathered the whole battalion before him, and they stripped him and put a scarlet robe upon him, and plaiting a crown of thorns, they put it on his head, and put a reed in his right hand. And kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, "Hail,
King of the
King of the
Jews."
Jews!" And they spat upon him. And they took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of his robe. They put his own clothes back on him, and they led him away to be crucified. As they went out, they came upon a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. This man they compelled to carry Jesus' cross. And when they came to the place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, they offered him wine to drink, mingled with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. And then they sat down and kept watch over him there. And over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." There were also 2 robbers crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and build it up in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." So also the chief priests, with the scribes and the elders, mocked him, saying,
He saved others, he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God, let God deliver him now, if he desires him, for he said, "I am the Son of God."
And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. Now from the 6th hour on, there was darkness all over the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice.
Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani.
That means,
My God, why hast thou forsaken me?
And some of the bystanders hearing it said,
This man is calling Elijah.
and one of them at once ran and took a sponge full of vinegar, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink. But the other said,
Wait, let us see if Elijah will come to save him.
Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit.
Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani.
And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split, and the tombs were opened. Many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. And when the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what had taken place, they were filled with awe and said,
Truly, this was the Son of God.
Now there were also many women there, looking on from afar, who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, among whom were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who also was a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and he asked for the body of Jesus, and then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in clean linen shroud, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn in the rock. And then he rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb, and he departed. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the sepulchre. The next day, that is, after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said,
Sir, we remember how that impostor said while he was still alive, After 3 days I will rise again. Therefore order the sepulchre to be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples go and steal him away, and tell the people, he has risen from the dead, and the last fraud will be worse than the first.
and Pilate said to them,
You have a guard of soldiers. Go and make it secure as you can.
So they went and made the sepulchre secure by sealing the stone and setting the guard. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Amen.